Really, really grateful to you for all turning up to listen to us talk about the evolution of enrichment at ZSL. What a privilege to be able to share some of this information with you. My name is Jim Mackie and I am the Animal Behaviour Management Officer here at the Zoological Society of London. I've got a really very cool job, I have to say, because what I get to do is to work with unbelievably passionate, committed zookeepers and their animals. And I get the opportunity to share some of the things that I've learned through my 26 years working for the Society and an extra 10 years working alongside animals in some capacity, but professionally doing it for 26 years now. And I just love the science of behaviour change. It's what I'm absolutely passionate about, and how we can combine that with our conservation programs and with our visitors that come here to the zoos. So I'm really blessed to get these opportunities to work with amazing people and animals, and now I get to share it all with you. So what is enrichment? If you've never heard the term before, here's a kind of long-winded description of it from Shepherdson from 1989. Essentially, I try and think about enrichment as enhancing emotional and physical well-being. That's it in a nutshell, and we do it in lots of different ways in the zoos. The traditional enrichment categories are food, habitat, sensory, social, and cognitive. The issue with this as a kind of concept is it doesn't really focus on natural behaviour. It might do, but when we're looking at these categories, we're really not thinking about wild animals and the way that they behave to control reinforcers in the environment, which is what we call free operant learning. Animals are constantly throughout the day going through life and figuring things out because of the consequences of their behaviour. And so we try now to think more and more about the behaviours that these animals can be doing, because we think really in the zoo community that the term enrichment has kind of lost its meaning a bit. It was a brilliant concept when it was first considered. If you think back to the 70s and 80s, most zoo habitats were pretty basic. A lot of them were essentially concrete boxes. And so enrichment helped us, the kind of philosophy behind enrichment helped us with planting, with thinking about what how these animals can be expressing some of those behaviours and meeting some of the things that you saw in that slide before. But unfortunately, we've kind of come to a point in the zoo world where a lot of the focus of enrichment, of enhancing the well-being of the animals' lives, is very much focused on the objects that we place into the enclosure in order to make that happen. And often they're very discrete events. And what I mean by that is that we might open up our cupboard of toys or things that we give to the animal. We might put a bit of food in there at 1 o'clock because we're ticking our enrichment box. We have a rota that we have to fulfill. So therefore we tick the box and we put the object in. We watch for 5 minutes. The animal moves it around a bit and we go tick. I'm a happy zookeeper, I've done my job. But we're not really properly evaluating the impacts of those discrete events. Enrichment can be very dependent on the creativity and passion of an individual, which is always a bit of a problem in zoos. You need to make sure that the people that are doing the enrichment can be super creative, but it's not always the way. And we are continually having to comply, and rightly so, with DEFRA's standards. So the Secretary of State Standards of Modern Zoo Practice, it governs everything we do in zoos, and it's a really useful tool, really useful set of guidelines for us. So it can be impactful, and it's certainly popular with our commercial and marketing teams, but what are we really seeing? And I'm going to play a little video here. It's a lovely video of a few different animal things going on in the Smithsonian Institute in America. This is a lovely behaviour, really natural behaviour of bathing. But when you look at the rest of these behaviours here, and there's nothing wrong with these, they're great. We do this sort of stuff all the time in zoos. But is it really impactful in the long term? Are we just basically adding in objects to satisfy a moment in that animal's life? For example, balls in a pond, and when we take the video and we share it on YouTube, everyone goes, right, I'm going to go and get a pond, chuck a few balls in it, and that's my cheetah enriched for the rest of its life. It just doesn't work that way. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing this stuff, we should, but we should continually evaluate it for the impact that we hope that it has. And we have had these frameworks of goal setting that have worked really well over the years, but maybe we need another thought about it. So I just wanted to share something that got me really inspired about the evidence-based approach to animal enrichment in zoos. So I was fortunate to go to India, to the Zuckerberg Zoo, where ZSL had a memorandum of understanding with the Wildlife Institute of India, and we developed a program to help with conservation breeding of Asiatic lions. And in order to do that, we needed to enrich those lions. These were the lions that we were focusing on. And there was a 3-month study done before we went over there for the workshop that identified these kind of issues, so apathy and a lack of behavioural diversity. We're pretty good at doing enrichment in the zoo. It's a trigger warning now. If you don't like animals eating meat, then look away now, because this is the head and neck of some deer that we'd placed in our Asiatic lion enclosure when they were in the institute while we were rebuilding Land of the Lions, so it's quite a small area. There's 3 of those hung up. Now, we weren't thinking necessarily too much about specific behaviours here. We were just thinking about a novel way to feed these animals. But as you can see, this physicality here and the different types of behaviour components that you can see with the kill bite, with the use of the 4 limbs there, and also the balancing with the tail, we're seeing loads of really, really cool stuff. So we went over to India with this knowledge, and we worked alongside our colleagues in the Wildlife Institute of India and the Zuckerberg Zoo, and we came up with a plan to help enrich their 65 captive Asiatic lions. Now, these lions were always fed in the same way, with a piece of flesh on the floor in their inside area. So they'd never seen meat on the bone, they'd never seen animal products in it, essentially, and they'd never had anything fight back when they were feeding. And what I really love about this, video was sent to me by Sitendu, who was the researcher, the academic researcher that was doing this project with us in India. And this was a 40-minute video. It took me ages to edit it down to the 2 minutes you're going to see here. But in essence, what you can see is like a really big impact. So not only just this behaviour here of the actual hunting behaviours that you're seeing, but also the behaviour diversity increased because they were doing things like scent marking, interacting with conspecifics in neighbouring enclosures, and all round this was hugely impactful. And what we found was the most important part of it is whenever you see a lion or a big cat in a zoo functionally resting, not just being apathetic or not just moving around in an abnormal way, they were certainly resting functionally. And this is one of the impacts, really. So pre-enrichment, post-enrichment, here you can see this huge increase in behaviour diversity. But also, it was quite interesting that they defined curious and non-curious as ones that used to come up to the front of the habitat to check out what people were doing. So it's pretty much, it had a big increase in both types of those animals. So this project inspired me to work towards changing our enrichment program at ZSL, because we weren't evidence-based, we weren't using science, we weren't evaluating impacts, we were just doing that daily routine of rotas and trying to meet those categories. And some of it was hugely successful, but some of it wasn't. So our evolution of enrichment is towards behaviourally diverse, enriched environments. This is what we're working towards. I'm using an example here. This is the colobus in the Snowdon, and it is a wonderful habitat, especially in the summer when the trees are got full of leaves. When we first planted the trees in the Snowdon, we tested out all of those leaves with browse, so we'd cut off the branches and given them to the colobus, and they didn't eat them. Of course, a living tree is much tastier than a piece of browse cut off, so they ate all the leaves, but that's fine. It was highly enriching, I'll tell you that. We do have experience providing enriched habitats and enrichment through daily husbandry at the zoo, particularly with things like our herptiles, so reptiles and birds. We create these beautiful microhabitats with all these wonderful opportunities for reproduction, feeding, social life, you name it. Going back to 2011, my colleague Paul Atkin wrote about how they managed one of their walkthroughs, and all they did was turn over substrates and present the food in a slightly enriched way. They didn't add anything at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to tick that enrichment box, because it was all there in the habitat. All they had to do was adjust their daily management and put a misting system up for showers. But we still needed some inspiration because we weren't quite finding a pathway to where we wanted to be with our enrichment. So this was provided by the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. They created this amazing project called Replace the Place and the Enriched Experience Program. All of their traditional enrichment wasn't helping this animal who was doing lots of repetitive behaviours. So they came up with this outcome-based husbandry model, replacing enrichment with experience. And essentially, in a nutshell, what it means is it moves away from what objects do I have to give the animal today to what behaviour do I want to promote today. A really subtle but quite influential light bulb moment for a lot of us working in the behaviour management industry. And this is the way it works. We start with behaviour rather than starting with the thing that we're going to give the animal. That's crucial. And it has to be what the animal does in the wild, not what you've seen in the zoo before. We break it down into components and context. We think about how they can do those things. We work out measurable outcomes to check impacts. And only then do we think about the input, the creative process of putting something in with the animal. The case study that I want to share with you quickly is with Khaleesi, our Komodo dragon. She had a decent enrichment program, showers and scatter feeds, scent trays, and some larger carcass feeds. And so we had an okay enrichment plan. But what we wanted to do was to use this workflow to identify some behaviours that we knew we weren't ever seeing. And in this example, this is just a silly video of one that's found itself with a head inside a turtle. But essentially what happens is when there's lots of like really heavy storms, marine life gets washed up on the beach and they scavenge. Sometimes they scavenge large whales. So these things, we couldn't get a whale in the Komodo dragon house here at London Zoo. But what we could do is think of a creative input that might replicate that a little bit. So there's the context and components, storms washing up the prey items. Here's the natural history adaptations. We really wanted to focus in on this Jacobson organ and forked tongue. And this is the Komodo dragon. If you're familiar with them, they're the a huge lizard, and we've got them here at the zoo. They're fantastic. The outcomes that we were looking for was prolonged duration of feeding, there's use of that Jacobson's organ, all the behaviour components being seen, but we wanted to see other stuff, increased basking and physicality. This is what it looked like when we were doing those large feeds before. So it took a total of 2 minutes and 54 seconds from exiting the den to consuming a whole chicken when it was just placed on the ground without any additional inputs or environmental cues available to it. And in fact, the actual process of eating the chicken is really quick. You'd be surprised just how big that gullet is. It's incredible, isn't it? But if you check out the animal, there isn't much going on apart from picking it up, throwing it back into its head and kind of chewing. There's a few bits, there's a few extra bits of behaviour there, but not much at all really. So we wanted to try and evoke some of those more natural behaviours and component parts of eating a large carcass feed that would be washed up on the beach. So, because we couldn't get a whale, we got a chicken instead. I know it's a bit of a letdown, but this is all we had to play with at the time. But we also added in showers, and we had this buried sandbag with a bungee here. And then we did, there's the chicken, just his head left out. And this is the video of Joe and Kim, my colleagues, who were doing this enrichment with me. And so we did a nice trail of the blood. And what you'll see when he emerged out of the den there, he's already picking up on those environmental cues. So you can see the head moving from side to side. And apparently they got more receptors in one side of their head than the other. So it means that they do focus and they move their heads around in order to catch that scent. This is a very, very edited video, again, a bit like the lions, as you can see. And as you can see, he's walked straight up, used his olfactory senses to find that resource. And instead of being able to put it straight in his mouth, he's like, oh, this one's fighting back. This is amazing. This has never happened before. And so he's starting to think how can she, it's Khaleesi, isn't it? It's she, I think, yeah. How she can get this resource inside of her. And you can see here that we flooded the enclosure as much as we possibly could using the existing misting system. So that was the environmental cue that preceded this feed. When you do this for the first time, you pair the environmental cue immediately with the reinforcer, in other words, with the food item, and then you gradually scale it back so that the water appears an hour, 2 hours before, which starts to evoke some of those exploratory behaviours and prolongs that enriched experience out. And I'll talk to you at the end of the thing about how we can do that over several days with certain enriched experiences. But as you can see, with just these these different camera angles, the kind of topography that we're seeing here with the Komodo dragon is very different to the one we saw when he just swallowed the carcass whole. Loads of head movement, using that neck, using those forelimbs, using that back, and using the tail as well. And this was a very prolonged feeding experience, as you can see. So the results, well, and I'm grateful to Olivia Corney, who was one of our WAB, so Wild Animal Biology students last year, who did a small study on this. There was no statistical analysis of this because we only did it one time in this condition, so we're going to do more trials. So we didn't properly evaluate it, but we did a kind of evaluation. And as you can see, from 1 minute eating the chicken, pie chart, love a pie chart, around 28 minutes, from exiting the den to consuming the whole chicken with a bungee, which is a huge increase in time of feeding. But most importantly, we saw all these other desired behaviour outputs. So it's the behavioural outputs, so those valued outcomes that we weren't seeing in the previous way we fed, that we were really looking for and hoping to achieve. And we certainly did that with this example. We saw those other post-feed behaviours that we were looking for. So returning to feed location, lots of return. In fact, the whole afternoon, she was continually returning back to that space and then resting functionally because she's tired out, because she's used up all of that inbuilt energy there. And the future editions, we'd like to do more environmental triggers and cues, and we'd also quite like to repeat this study over a few iterations with different types of carcasses, so things like pony legs, and see how much time and more behaviour diversity we see. So that's one example of the way that we challenged and changed a feeding program, an enrichment program at the zoo. And one of the major areas for development in our enrichment program is with food presentation. So I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome my close colleague. We work in the evidence-based animal care team together. And as Diet Management Officer, Amanda is responsible for creating tailored diets for all the animals across both London and Whipsnade zoos, from snails up to elephants. With experience in roles such as animal keeper and zoo research coordinator, Amanda has a holistic understanding of how nutrition science can be applied to enhance animal care. In addition to clinical nutrition, Amanda works on food presentation techniques to encourage species-specific natural feeding behaviours, ultimately leading to better health, welfare and conservation outcomes. And we work really closely together with my two other colleagues, Lewis Rowden, who's the research officer and he's our manager, and also Lisa Clifford, the animal welfare officer. Thanks, Amanda. Round of applause for Amanda.
Thank you, Jim, for that. So, yeah, I think I've got a really cool job, actually, at the zoo, looking at everything that the animals eat and how they eat it. So let's get straight into it. So whatever the species, whether it's snail or elephant, there's really the same principles that we always think about when we're designing a feeding programme for animals. And I always think of it as a triangle of needs, and we have to satisfy all of these. So obviously there's the nutritional element, which I spend a lot of time on, which is looking at all the nutrients and making sure the animals have that so that they can function correctly. But today, really, I'm going to talk more about food presentation because that really affects the behavioural needs of our animals and the physiological needs, how the body works with its muscles, with its skeleton, etc. So food presentation is really crucial for meeting those needs. So we always use the wild as our reference when we're looking after animals. And with feeding, obviously it's the natural history and their feeding ecology. And we know animals are highly evolved. They've evolved for millions of years for a specific way of life. And they have morphological and behavioural adaptations. And we know that using those benefits their physical and mental well-being. And there's research published on that, so we know that's a given. And of course, most of their time is spent procuring food in some way or another in the wild. So if we don't meet these needs, we kind of have a deficit, and then there are actually consequences. We can get stereotypies, we get inactivity, which then can lead to a change in the fat and muscle ratio. Disease pathologies can be evidenced, and you get deterioration in skeletal health and things like with carnivores. It's been shown in the Museum of Scotland, the Natural History Museum there, they look at a lot of the deceased animals from zoos and, of course, in the wild, and they're seeing that over time, actually, carnivore skulls were actually getting smaller and changing shape. So there's consequences. So, we can look after our animals really brilliantly and have a lovely looking animal, but actually what we want is a functional animal. And that's really important if we're talking about putting animals back into the wild as well. So if we have a think about these behaviour chains, how does an animal go about procuring food in the wild? First of all, it has to locate its food, uses a whole suite of senses there, visual, auditory, olfactory, senses we don't really use at all. The spiders with the hairs that pick up vibration. So a lot of senses are being used, and then also exploratory behaviours, locomotion, activity, whether animals are looking for the food up terrestrial or up arboreally or in water. There's a lot of activity. Then the animal has to secure its food. So if it's a hunter, it's going to have to track it down, chase it, kill it. And a herbivore is going to have to select foods. It may have to go through, select leaves, etc. It may have to negotiate thorns, or plants are always thinking of ways so that animals are deterred from eating them. At the same time, you're going to have to be vigilant to make sure that there's not predators coming to get you, or that indeed other predators are coming to, or other animals are going to come and take the food away that you've just found. And then there's the processing and the consuming. So once the animal has the food, it may need to take it somewhere really safe for it to eat, where nothing else is going to disturb it. It may need to get into the food, like the parrots with the nuts there. Or, with carnivores, they have to dismember a prey item and get it into a form where they can take it in and swallow it and start the process of digestion. So there's a whole lot of complex behaviours going on there. And of course, it all takes a long, long time. Giraffe, 11 hours a day feeding. Elephant, even more, 16 to 18 hours. They're big animals. They eat quite low quality food, so a lot of time spent getting that food. And those cranes there, 3/4 of their day is spent foraging. And even carnivores, we may think, they don't spend very much time hunting, but in actual fact, the hunt success rate is pretty low. Look, for the lions, it's only about 1/4 of their hunting activity gets them what they want. So all in all, procuring food takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of specialist skills using those adaptations. So if you come back to the old classic way of feeding, this sort of food, that just isn't providing the animal with any opportunity to use those skills, those behavioural skills, those morphological adaptations, etc. It's quick to eat, it's unchallenging, it's predictable, and if you feed like that, you're going to get some deficit there in the behavioural and psychological needs, and that will introduce a welfare compromise. So again, as Jim mentioned earlier, the classic enrichment was, let's pop something in, keep it busy for a bit, without really evaluating it. And we see this sort of thing, the Easter egg hunt. I mean, what is that really? What is that doing for the animal? It's just a different coloured bowl. So we want to look bigger than that. We really want to move on, and we want to kind of, with this evolving enrichment, we're looking at food presentation. And rather than using food as tokenistic kind of enrichment, we want to create a whole enriched feeding environment to achieve these outcomes. So we want the animal to exhibit its full diversity of feeding behaviour, or as much as we can in captivity. If we can replicate it or think of some substitute ways of getting them to use their species-specific behaviour. We want them to use their evolutionary adaptations. Great example here of the eye with its middle finger to kind of seek out grubs in trees. And we want to try and align our foraging and feeding time budgets with what they would be in the wild. Because if we feed things very quickly and they've then got plenty of time, you can be sure that with that time they're going to start doing things that we don't want and that isn't what we want those animals to do. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, we need a really thorough knowledge of the species' natural history. And that's great here. We've got loads of passionate people working with the animals, and they're super keen and read up all the time. So we've got a lot of that already. And we need some creative thinking, because we can't just replicate the wild. We are in a different situation. And we need a process, really. And, because we want to evidence it, we want to document it, and we want to see be able to evaluate it as well. So as Jim mentioned, this is the behaviour workflow that we've adopted now that San Diego kind of introduced us to. And I know Gemma's going to be talking about that a bit later on, and Jim will talk a bit more about it. So now I'm just going to go on and talk about some kind of examples of the ways that we can manipulate feeding to get some of the outcomes that I mentioned on the previous slide. So here's a nice example of some naturalistic feeding, some slow feeding, really, that was done in America with 6 herds of Przewalski horses, and these animals were looked at, and they were showing some unwanted behaviours, really. They were pacing and they were eating their own faeces. So they were being fed twice a day, kind of fairly standard, really, for equids, or domesticated equids anyway. So they were being fed twice a day. So this experiment changed that feeding, and they were given ad lib forage. So that is forage available all the time, night and day, always there. And they found out that after a period of time doing this, that the coprophagy eating faeces completely eliminated and the pacing reduced. So that's a really nice way of showing how that by feeding the animals in a more natural way, allowing them to choose to eat in the natural way, that it really, they started to show much better behaviours, really. And you can see it's really obvious, isn't it, from the graphs there. They're not from the study, but they do exemplify. If you're feeding animals at certain time periods, they're taking a lot of energy in a very quick time, and it's much better to feed them that lower energy level over time. It's much more naturalistic. But as you know, animals are individuals. Some animals adapt really well to that. Other animals, if given the opportunity, will just kind of gorge. So we may want to kind of restrict the feeding so they're not getting too many calories, but they're still able to eat consistently and constantly. So again, taking some examples from the horse world, using small hold hay nets, we tried this out anyway with the donkeys. At London, we used small hold hay nets, and actually the feed time doubled. So what was taking them an hour took them 2 hours. So that was really nice. Just something small that the keepers could do, but measure. Again, we wanted to evaluate to say how much difference does this make. You can do it with a pellet as well. We put in the pellet in these special feeders with other items in there, so it's actually quite difficult for the animals to get the pellet, because you can imagine if you're giving pellet in a bucket, that's very, very quick for the animal to get its calorie intake. We can also manipulate the energy content of the food we're giving, and this allows us to give more food. So if we can change things like sweet potato for broccoli, which has got about half the calories, we can give twice as much in terms of weight. So that's really beneficial because the animal's spending longer eating, but it's not putting on that kind of calorie. So you can manage its weight. We do it quite a lot with all our herbivores, really, with hay and straw. If you can manipulate those, and again, you can bring down the energy level. But allow them to eat and show those behaviours for longer. So we can give them things in a cognitive challenge. Now, as Jim said, this is, these are one, in a way, these are one-off things. They are objects that we put in, but what's important is what kind of behaviours we want to stimulate from that. And with these cognitive challenges, it's kind of like problem-solving behaviour. And again, we'll try and reference natural history. So the chimp there is starting to use tools to get stuff it likes out of something, but you could make that much more naturalistic and have it like a termite mound or something where there's insects. All sorts of species can do this, even reptiles and amphibians as well. So it's something that challenges the animal and makes them think cognitively and use that facility. So we've just got an example here of the chimps at Whipsnade. And this is, So this is one of the feeders where the chimp can use its fingers or get a tool and move the nuts along a shelf which has holes in it, and then it falls to the next shelf and the next shelf and the next shelf, and then at the bottom the chimp can retrieve that. Now, Jim, you've got the timings, haven't you, for all our different apes and how long they all took. They're all individuals, so they all take different amounts of times as well. So this chimp's thinking about it, doing it. This is a different chimp.
That was the quickest one.
That's, yeah, the quickest one. Got the same outcome. So it's kind of interesting, but you can see the different behaviours. Look at the way with the front of its hands, it's knocking that. So two completely different ways of doing things, and both kind of valid. They've taken those chimps have taken some time to think about that, and then physically act and to get the reward that they want, the food they want, which is kind of more what they'd be doing in the wild, isn't it? You know, it doesn't come out on plates or shells and that in the wild. So a physical challenge, that's another, another really great way of challenging the animals and feeding the animals so that they have to do something very physical and they're using energy to get their food. So this can be burying food or hanging it up. Using the roofs is a really excellent way that we use for some of our animals. I mean, you imagine if you've got to eat whilst you're hanging onto the side of something, you're using a lot of energy doing that, and you're also building up all your muscles. Well, we know that animals in the zoo as well are not as active, clearly, as they are in the wild, so anything that will kind of encourage them to use those muscles and to be active is really useful. This is a great example of a snow leopard here. I mean, the branch it was going up was straight up anyway, so that's quite challenging, and then at the top it had a chick on top of that wooden platform there. It couldn't see it, so it has to put its paw up and then kind of move its paw around to try and grab the chick and then pull it down. So again, that took time, it took cognitive skill, it took physical skill. Right, so I'm just going to introduce this concept of contra-freeloading, which is when an animal actually chooses, when there's food available, it will actually choose to go and eat the one that requires effort to get to it. So you can see there the meerkat was choosing to interact with that device and rather than eat all the food that was in the bowl next to it. So that's just something that shows that, with cognitive and physical challenges, that's something that the animals actually really enjoy, and they will often choose that over just simply eating it out of a bowl. If we feed complex food items that's similar to what they get in the wild, obviously this is going to have a beneficial effect on the animals as well. So there's some work we did with colobus. This was actually, so the colobus that we've got in the monkey forest there, folivores, they just eat leaves, but this work was done a few years ago before they went into that enclosure. And basically it was just looking at what browse did, and if we give them the browse, their feeding behaviour nearly doubled. The time spent feeding nearly doubled. But we also saw a whole suite of new behaviours as well, with bark stripping and selecting of various leaves and leaving stuff and then going back to it. So really nice way of providing our animals. Browse, unfortunately, is quite difficult to get hold of enough, but getting the evidence of things like this really helps to show how important it is that we put the effort in to get more browse. So giraffe, another animal that is a browse priority animal for us because it eats leaves in the wild. But again, we've shown very clearly that by adding browse, giraffes have a really complex tongue use. They use their facial muscles quite a lot. And by providing that provides a need for them, satisfies a behavioural need. And if animals were fed, that first picture is at the zoo, it's one from the old archives. But you can see if we're giving them forage just in a trough, they could just eat that without even barely moving their tongue. They don't have to do much with their tongues at all. And giraffes classically have had a lot of stereotypies, oral stereotypies. So by providing browse, we really bring that level of stereotypy down. We also see all these great behaviours using with their tongues and facial. This is one of the devices, as well as doing it with the forage, we can do it with the pellet, because as pellet in a bucket goes very quickly, but if you put it in some kind of device like this, you can see their tongues are going in, and there's balls in there as well, and they have to move around that in order to get just a little bit of pellet out at a time. And this is Molly, our star. So there's a drain pipe and there's pellet in there, and of course there's more drain pipe covering the holes. She's become very expert at this, and it's great to see. So it's cognitive, she's having to think about it, she's exploring, she's using her tongue, she's using her lips, and it's all taking time. So that's, if we can provide that sort of thing for the animals every day, that's great. Okay, elephants as well, another animal that really responds well to having the complex food, the browse there, and there's research at Oakland Park Zoo, and we've done it at Whipsnade as well, showing that feeding behaviours increase, anticipatory behaviours decrease, and the feed and foraging time increases. Just a warning, because we're going to be showing some more carnivore pictures, so yes, there'll be a bit of blood. So complex food for carnivores is like whole prey. I'm giving them this. Obviously, there's lots of different parts of the animal, different ways of getting to the food. Has lots and lots of positives. Lots of different feeding behaviours. But we can do more than that. Just putting it on the floor is one way, but actually, obviously, in the wild, they don't come across that on the floor. So we have been using these tiger poles, which were introduced. And you can see just the effort and the muscles in that are really good. They're using the same muscles that those animals would be using when they're hunting in the wild. So this is one of our tigers. And just kind of the strength, again, the skill, but the energy expenditure to do that is it's a much more naturalistic way of feeding and showing a really nice diversity of behaviour. We've got another one here. Now this is great because this showed an unusual behaviour we hadn't seen before with this one. Super keen to get that. I mean, look at the strength in there. And Lena's tail, I didn't mention the tail earlier on, the cat there, but you know, a lot of tail use there as well to balance. You just wouldn't get that if you weren't feeding in this way. So that's a great paper if anyone's really interested in tigers and feeding poles. I mean, and so this is a great example of evaluation as well, how something that's been introduced and it's been looked at over 20 years and reviewed. There you go, at last, okay. So, and then this is our hunting dogs that we've had on a zip wire. We had a horse's leg on a zip wire. Again, having that moving target, having something not static, having something that the animals, they need to work together to kind of, first of all, they have to kind of catch it. There's a bit of a hunt there. They have to work as a pack. You can see them all work, you know, coming together. And then they have to be there to bring it down so that they can start ripping it and eating it. They all have to work together to do that as well. Quite physical, lots of effort. There's lots of excitement and activity when this goes on. So very good for social cohesion. So again, it's very, you know, it's naturalistic. It's thinking about more than just getting food into them. It's how it's done. Okay, just about finished. So evaluation is really important to us. So with this strawberry dart frog, we did this very simple but really nice, some nice little project here. So live food, which was crickets, was given in a dish, but there was lots of bowls, there was lots of leaves put on top. Showed some great foraging activity and not so much of this rapid feed techniques that we don't want. But the similar thing really with this tree lizard, that we had an enrichment device, we had crickets in that, put it in. Yes, we've ticked the enrichment box, but actually unless you evaluate it, you wouldn't know that actually what that did was the complete opposite. Feeding behaviour diversity decreased because the lizard just got to know what it was and just stood and sat underneath it. There's probably things we could do to change that, but that just shows the real importance of being evidence-based and having, evaluating what we do. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Oh, that was amazing. Thank you very much, Amanda. Really, really cool presentation. Loads of fascinating information shared. We're going to actually focus on that topic now with evaluation. So what we're going to do next is ask Gemma Worboys to come and join us. I'm just going to introduce you quickly, Gemma. So Gemma Worboys is has been working at London Zoo for 8 years, within the zoo industry for 12. She's the curatorial lead keeper of the Hoofed section here, and that role means that she spends most of the day working closely with the ungulate species held at the zoo, cleaning, feeding, training, enriching, but with a keen interest in research and promoting keeper-led activities and projects. She oversees the section's research and is working to extend the reach of the team's achievements and knowledge by sharing it within the wider zoo community, including sharing their work on introducing giraffe, zebra and ostrich within a city zoo at conferences. And that was recently presented at ABWAC, so the Wild Animal Keepers Conference, which that went down really, really well. Yeah, we're going to ask Gemma to come up and join and talk to us about Okapi.
Thank you.
I'm not sure it's working or not.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, hi, I'm Gemma. Thank you for my very first introduction. I feel quite flushed now, but I'm here to talk to you about a very specific case study that was done with one of our species here at London on Hoofed, which is our Okapi. And it was very exciting for us to be involved as keepers because this was actually a project that was done by a student from Cardiff University, Jessica Stewart, and she was also an intern with our EAC team, our evidence-based animal care team here at the zoo. But we got to be involved with a lot of it from start to finish. Yeah, it's not working. So before I can talk about the Enriched Experiences programme and the case study that we did, I need to show you a little bit about what we were doing before. So as Jim said, this was the more traditional approach to enrichment. We put these devices in, we were thinking more about how can we slow down our okapi from feeding and gorging themselves rather than what behaviours we could look for. So it's not to say that these enrichment devices were bad, they still served a purpose, they still did encourage our okapis to feed for a lot longer, to show a bit more choice, but we weren't, as keepers, really thinking about what behaviours we wanted to show and what types of behaviours were actually out there. So to show you what we were looking for, we did our very first collaborative workflow. So this project was with us at London and at San Diego zoos, both of them, with the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. So we used the workflow process that was developed with San Diego Zoo. We got together for 60 minutes on a Zoom call to produce this. Now, this does look a little bit scary. There's a lot of words going on here, but for this case study, we looked just at complex tongue use. But we did cover so many different behaviours, and it was a little bit like a light bulb moment. We did sit there and think there were so many behaviours that we never considered, like drinking water, for example. We never thought about how we would provide that. So there are so many things that can come out of this workflow process and hopefully improve the lives of our animals, just from us thinking about enrichment in a slightly different way. So as I said, we chose biologically relevant and complex tongue use. Now, this is actually not a behaviour we see a lot with our okapi, but it is very, very, very important for other giraffes. And you saw the outside video. Let me show you what was going on inside that barrel. So this is, I think this is Nuru, our giraffe, showing you just how incredible that tongue is. So that behaviour there is more than just licking. She's using lots of different muscles. She's got to feel which food is available and which is not a natural food item. So she's using lots of senses, muscles, all to be able to just get some pellet outside of that ball. We then had to break it down further into its context and components. So we decided to focus on leaf textures and structural complexity. But in that workflow I showed you a moment ago, we broke it down into lots and lots of different things. We even had thoughts about social grooming. They have to use that tongue to lick each other, to lick themselves. They have to use that tongue to identify what's safe to eat and what's not. And when you look at that camera trap photo, which is the photo in the middle, that shows you an okapi standing out in the wild. And that is an okapi standing in a complex environment with lots of different leaf structures and textures. They've got to use that tongue, got to use those tactile senses in order to work out what they can access as food within that environment. We then looked at the natural history, which is that incredibly long and prehensile tongue, but also the ability to reach, to use their muscles in their necks, to be able to lower their heads up and down, to use those elongated muzzles and that nose. And then we had a look at what we could measure. So this was very important to the study because it's not just about putting the enrichment in, it's about evaluating it. So we were hoping to see prolonged complex tongue use, which could be a prolonged time of them using that tongue, using it to wrap around branches to strip leaves and pull it off. But we were also hoping to see a reduction in oral stereotypy behaviour. So what we were seeing a lot with our okapi was a repetitive licking behaviour. solely focused around their water troughs. They'd spend a lot of time licking the edges of it, licking the sides of it, not necessarily drinking. So we were hoping that something like this could show a decrease in that. And we could also potentially see some increase in musculature from all of that tongue use. So what did we put in? This is what we decided on the end. So we had 2 different devices. So we have the hanging mesh basket, which is the one on the left-hand side there. And this basket has lots of different sticks and branches weaved, and the holes in the basket were just about big enough for their tongues to fit through. We then also designed a browse bone skirt, and a browse bone is just another way of saying an old piece of browse. So it was a piece of browse that the okapi had used, they'd eaten the leaves, they were done with it. We strung them all together, you can see the twine just in the middle, to create a really long piece, and then we'd wrap that around our fresh browse. And the idea was that our okapi would have to use their tongue to stick between the browse that they didn't want to eat, those really annoyingly, inconveniently placed bones, and then rip the leaves on from the inside. They'd have to negotiate and maneuver around the old bones to get those leaves. Who was going to be testing this out? So I'd like to introduce you to Oni and Edie. So Oni is our mother, our breeding female. She has been at the zoo for many, many years, and she's definitely a firm favourite. And at the time, we housed her calf, Edie, on the right-hand side. And what was very, very nice and very easy for this study is that we actually housed them separately. So this meant that we could look at the behaviours of the okapis and look at them as individuals. So this is where the really hard work of Jess started. So Jess did a lot of behavioural observations. She used a program called Zoo Monitor to take her observations, and she spent every day 10 minutes from 10 to 4 p.m. looking at our okapi. So we did 2 study periods. We did one in March to April, and that was to establish our baseline. So this was when we didn't have any of those enrichment devices in, so this gave us the data that we could compare back to. And then we did a second period that we then popped our enrichment into, and this is what we would then hope to see, that complex tongue use. And she was doing this for 10 minutes every day, and within that time she'd take a scan behaviour for our carpies every 30 seconds, and then all occurrence behaviours for any abnormal repetitions. So if we did see that oral stereotypy, if we did see that licking, we would have that on note. And what this really equated to was Jess spending a lot of time with our okapi and collecting lots of data. And we had the privilege as keepers to just hang the enrichment up and be able to leave her to it. So thank you very much, Jess, for spending all of your time doing that, because we saw some very, very exciting results. And whilst we were doing this, San Diego were doing the exact same thing out in their zoos with their okapis. What did we see? So this is a graph of all of our data put together. So that's both okapis with both enrichment devices. So in blue, you've got our baseline data, so the time that we didn't have those devices in, and in green, that was when we had those devices available to the okapi. So we saw significant differences in both complex feeding and significant change in that oral stereotypy as well. So what was really wonderful to see is we saw an increase in that tongue use, and it increased from 5% to 19%, which is almost quadrupling. So that was an incredible result. And I think most importantly for us keepers, we saw a decrease in that stereotypy, dropping from 6.45 to 2%. And really, this is exactly what we were hoping to see. You couldn't have written it better. And there you can see that tongue in use. So we did have a lot more leaves in that basket when we started, and I think Edie has cleared absolutely all of them. So the baskets worked really, really well. We didn't see the complex tongue use as much with the browse bones. What we learned is that the okapi learned very quickly that they didn't need to use their tongue to access any of that browse. They learned that they could just push their face through it and get to it on the other side. But we did see some other behaviours. So we saw a lot of leaning down, as you can see there at the end of the video. Oni and Edie had to lean and go underneath to get some of that. So it might not have been our behavioural goal of complex tongue use, but seeing them feed in a slightly different way, using different muzzles, was still positive and still a really good thing for us to know. So the big outcome is that it worked. We're really, really happy to see that this study, the science has shown that a significant increase in complex tongue use has come from creating an enrichment device using this enriched experience workflow. The future goal is something Jim's going to talk to you a little bit about next, is that this has helped to inform a new behaviour-based feeding and management plan. So this will be rolling out across the zoos, and having something in the bank like this, some proof that it really does truly work, is very, very good place to start. And when we think about it for the Okapi, it's going to really, really help us move away from that traditional enrichment, which we do it still. We do still fall into that old tradition of at 2 o'clock heading over to the house, looking at what's hanging up on the racks. What am I going to give the Okapi today to slow them down a bit? What can I do? And it's very much put it in, walk away and do the same thing tomorrow. And knowing that this works and seeing those incredible results really will help to push this in the right direction. And one of the most important strategic outcomes was that positive keeper response from us. So the whole team loved it. We were on board from the start. It was really amazing to be included in that workflow experience at the beginning, to spend time with our colleagues across the other side of the world, and to come up with these really cool enrichment devices, and to know that this is going to help roll it out across the zoo. What one challenge will be is to facilitate the sustainability, because we have, despite this evidence, we have fallen back into our old patterns, because it does take that little bit much more time. And we just don't always have the time. We'd love to have more time in our day. And we're hoping that once we get this ball rolling, if we can really, really find ways to make sure that we can do this on the ground, that we will move forward with it. But I do want to talk to you about a little extra. So when we did that workflow process, we identified drinking as a behaviour, and that was probably the biggest sort of mind-blowing moment, because we'd never really considered drinking as a behavioural output. We very much focus it on, they need water, we'll provide water, we'll put the trough in. And what we were seeing was that stereotypy, that licking behaviour. So when it was highlighted in the workflow, this section, we're really, really keen to investigate that and see what we could do to reduce that stereotypy. So we changed our vision. We forgot about drinking as a biological need. We saw it as a behavioural goal. And we came up with a few devices. So one of them was our hose and tray setup. So we created our very own rain from slightly rudimentary beginnings with a hose on the wall, but then we've got our water drinker at the bottom acting as our pond. And Oni was a little bit not so keen at the start, but we did see her having to clear those raindrops that were landing on her coat off with her tongue. So that was another way of her drinking water. We didn't think about that until that workflow. We didn't see water as an opportunity to lick droplets off. So by hosing her down, it collected on her waterproof coat. It meant she could spend more time licking. We could now roll that out to spraying all of our enclosures down with it. We can spray our browse so they have to lick water off the leaves. But I think the most exciting one for the section, because it led to something a little bit bigger, was our waterfalls. So we built 2 big waterfalls within our enclosures, which led to a big enclosure revamp to create a much more naturalistic environment. And the waterfall allows the Okapi to either lower their heads to the pools to drink, to lick running water from the rockwork, or to drink from the ridges and the little collective pockets. So there were lots of different options for the Okapi to explore with our waterfalls. So this is a little showing you what work actually went into the enclosure to make it change. And it was incredible. So it's a big shout out to our enclosure design officers, George and Jacob, and our enclosure lead, Dan, on the team, who made all that possible. And it went down an absolute treat. So on the video on the right, you can actually see she starts to lick the wall as well as using the collective pool at the bottom. So we were seeing lots of different behaviours that we'd written in our context through this workflow. And it was, just wonderful to see that they went down so well. And what it actually eventually led to is us completely removing our troughs from our enclosure. So we don't see that stereotype behaviour anymore, because the Okapi chose to drink the water from the waterfall rather than drinking from the troughs that were static and mounted on the wall. And that's it from me. So before I'd like to go, I'd like to say a big thank you to Jess, because she did do all the hard work. We just took the glory. A big thank you to our evidence-based animal care team, which is Jim, Lisa, Lewis and Amanda. A thank you to Jessica and Louisa out in San Diego with the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, and a big thank you to the Hoofed team for having minimal input but maximum results. So thank you.
I always find it really interesting when we look at drinking as a behaviour, just as Gemma talked about there. And when you're looking at all those different ways that animals find water in the wild, funnily enough with the okapi, we realised that one of them isn't having a trough this high off the ground in the middle of the Congo rainforest. Who knew? It's funny, isn't it? But it's a very simple way of looking at it. And I really appreciated, Gemma, speaking about the impact it had with the keepers, because really the most important part of all this process is making sure it works and is implemented on the ground. And when we talk about the trials there of testing out those different types of feeders, the idea is that they aren't then used at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to put up, but they just become part of daily care. And what we're working out now is that when they take a long time, we need to find a way to slot it into a routine. So it might be that they're used, we decide that the behaviour of complex tongue use needs to be seen 4 times a week, and therefore we achieve that. But actually I know that it's been happening every single day in different ways, which is fantastic. Okay. So I'm just going to finish up with a couple of cool little case studies that we've been working with right now. So we're talking about the future and present of enrichment at ZSL. And these are, I'm quite restless when it comes to my work, and I just like the next thing. You know, I think a lot of us are like that in the zoo world. And so I wanted to share a couple of cool things. But before I do that, I just wanted to introduce the concept of the enriched experiences, because at San Diego Zoo, what they did is they kind of broke it down into these 2 parts. The workflow that you've seen Gemma so perfectly illustrate there, how we came up with those inputs. But there's also another really exciting element to it, which is the enriched experiences, a multi-day experiences program that they run. And they've done loads of cool examples. I'm going to share one with you. And it's this one with Sumatran tiger, hunting. And what they do is the end result behaviour is a carcass feed, which is that typical thing that Amanda was talking through there. It can be presented in certain ways. They decided to float a goat on their pool, and so they have to swim out and take it off a floating device and then take it back to the side where they can consume it. But they wanted to make that more exciting because it only happens once a month. So they wanted to prolong that experience out. So day 1, 4 days before the carcass feed, they start putting tapir footprints. They got made a clay version of a tapir footprint, and they put those footprints around the water hole. Isn't that cool? And then they'd add the urine of tapir around as well. So there's an olfactory environmental cue there. Then the next day after that, they'd start to break down the shrubs around that pond area so that it looks like there's been an animal, a large hoofstock, moving around that area. Another environmental cue that is a clue that there might be prey items available in the environment. Day 3, they'd fly a kite over the top of the, and it's a bird of prey kite, so that's quite a cool thing. So the tiger would be clocking that and going, okay, it's nearly time to start my stalking and hunting behaviour. And only then on day 4 would they add the carcass. So there's all of this environmental cues leading up to it. Now, this is that free operant that I was talking about. The free operants in the habitat. The animal has to clock all these different environmental cues, learn from them, and know that there's food available. And this was the final behaviour. And you can see all of this stuff on YouTube. If you're really interested, I'll give you a few resources at the end if you want. So how are we going to test that out at ZSL? Our first version of trying it out is happening right now. We're in the middle of these 2 really exciting projects, and all I can do is provide you with the updates where we're at today, because they're happening now and they're going to be carrying on for the next 6 months. The first one is with these Asiatic short-clawed otters, which are wonderful species. So what was the behaviour we looked for? Well, it's a very, very specific behaviour that the Asian short-clawed otter does, which is the otter that's out there in the wild that spends most time on land compared to any other otter. So it's foraging for mudskippers. What they do is they seek out the resource and then they shove their forelimbs down into the sand where the mudskippers are hiding in order to try and get that food out. The outcomes that we were looking for, so those are the components that we were looking for, the behavioural components broke down. We want to see these outcomes, so a change in social dynamic, increase in enclosure usage, and what are the contexts, what are those environmental cues that precede the ability for an otter to catch mudskippers? Well, it's pretty straightforward. That is a riverbank, and the riverbank is flooded normally, so when the tide goes away, then they're able to go out on that riverbank and start to hunt for mudskippers. So you can replicate that in the zoo environment. So what are our inputs? Well, first of all, we want multiple substrate-filled pools or receptacles of some description filled with tubes of different sizes and lengths, and we want to flood that prior to feeds, and we want to extend that flooding period out to evoke the foraging behaviours before the food goes into the enclosure. So where are we at now? So we're not halfway through this project yet, but we started to do some cool things, and we collaborated with our horticulture team, who told us about these things called air pots, and they use them to plant large trees in the zoo, and we cut them down to size. They gave us a load of substrate. They're amazing, the horticulture team here at ZSL. They love watching and contributing and collaborating when it comes to animal behaviour management. So we did pebbles and sand. Then we were able to shove these tubes down into the substrate there. And I'm thanking Mose, who's down in the front row, for taking all of the pictures and videos that you're going to see in these next two projects. Mose is our student placement of this year. Jessica was last year, did the Okapi. And this is my favourite picture, the little sprat head in the middle of that tube there. And so this is the results of the first trial. So here's, this is me just getting prepared for this input. Now, bearing in mind that the one thing that we're trying to do with all of these different ways of feeding and different ways that we're trying to evoke these behaviours and the behavioural outputs is that we want to make it so user-friendly that we're not adding stuff at 2 o'clock. This becomes part of a 2-week or month-long feeding regime. And so what we really want to do with these is to just trial them, make sure they work, evaluate them properly, and then we add in 10 of those into the environment. And the only thing you have to add in is the tubes, because you have to wash those. So anyway, this is what it looked like the very first time, and we didn't know whether they were going to interact with these. We didn't know whether that behaviour was innate, whether it was part of their factory settings, we call it, so part of their DNA, or whether they would have to really properly learn how to do it. And you know, again, it's that free operant. Once they do it once, they're reinforced for that behaviour. Even a genetic behaviour, something that's inside of the animal as they are born or hatched, it's subject to operant conditioning. So as soon as they get food out of after doing that behaviour once, they learn it. It's an operant response. And so what we saw, which was really cool, was they didn't interact with this straight away. Again, this is a nicely edited video down from sort of 10 minutes to this video that you can see here. But we started to see some really lovely cooperative behaviours. We were told we have to have 2 of these if we're going to do the trial because they're so competitive over food. Mummy otter displaces daddy otter from all the food so she can feed the pups that are in that little den there, by the way. I'm not sure we're allowed to say that, probably not. But anyway, you know they've got pups in there now. I'll give that one away. Cut that, edit that. Hopefully they'll be coming out pretty soon anyway, so you'll get to see them. So that cooperative behaviour, they were together. They were exploring this new stimulus in the environment. And they were running back to make sure the pups are okay and then back again. And this kind of continual response to that stimulus was happening over a prolonged period of time. And in the end, I was like, are they actually going to find the food and do the thing we were asking? And then suddenly, this is what happened. They do the exact behaviour that is catching mudskippers in the wild. We'd never seen this behaviour before, and more importantly, nor had Kate, who's the zookeeper that's helping me and Mose put all this stuff out there in the environment for them. And so we were super excited because we're seeing a really species-typical, not species-specific, species-typical behaviour that is seen in the wild for a very, very a good reason, which is to catch these mudskippers. So the next part of this is going to be trialling the flooding element, right? So this will be, it probably won't be multi-day, but it might be prolonging that experience for that animal. So what we can do is we can take this long hose, instead of being in the enclosure, where all these devices and inputs are dotted around the habitat, we can then go over the top and we can flood them while the otters are still in there. and we need to find a way of making sure that they don't drain too fast. So there's water in there and they can swim around in them, because we can do them 10 metres wide if we want, if we had enough space. We can do ones that are larger, smaller, deeper, shallower, and they're always there in the environment. We flood it, and that's the environmental cue for the otters to go start to explore. Then we can recall them inside, go and add food in them, but we will have 10 of them in the environment with maybe 50 tubes, and only 10 of those tubes have food available. So they've got a really good and prolonged foraging and hunting experience. And I did see some differences when it was flooded, right? Didn't we, Mose? We saw them sniffing around, and the substrate felt different, so it was a very, very cool thing to see. We've got this rapid evaluation process, and our EAC leads here at the zoo are amazing at filling these out, because they've just been a joy to us, the EAC leads, of getting our behaviour management goals and strategic goals over the line. We're super grateful. And we did this, and we saw the extra behaviours that you saw there, so that was really cool. These are the next steps. We're doing this with Nuki Zoo. So we're actually doing this multi-zoo. Us, Whipsnade, Nuki, we might even get Dartmoor involved. Anyone else who's got Asiatic short-clawed otters in their house, or they work in a zoo, call us, because we want to do this project with as many places as we can. We want to do all these kind of increase the number of riverbanks, we're calling them, right, this particular input. Most important is that bottom one. Again, how are we going to get this to be easily usable for the average zookeeper that has no time in the day in order to do this stuff? And I think it's that simplicity, making sure that the inputs are in place, we can cover them and make them aesthetic with planting. It will look super nice, and then we can just add things, add the food to them and the flooding. And we can work out how often they need to do it. How often would they catch mud skippers in the wild? Maybe once a week, maximum. That's all you need to do. Add it to your portfolio of behaviours. So anyway, right, that's otters. This is what we did today. This is actually right up to date. So not only is it the future, it's very much the present of what we're doing here at ZSL with our Enriched Experiences program that we've stolen from San Diego Zoo. But they are very grateful that we're using it and sharing it this as well. So, we're constantly communicating with them. It's fantastic. So I'm really interested in birds of prey. I was a falconer before I was a farmer and then a zookeeper. So that's my passion, birds of prey. And we've got these amazing species here at the zoo, our African harrier hawk, sometimes called gymnogenes. And they've got this unbelievably cool natural species typical behaviour that they use to do most of their feeding, which is they use their incredibly long legs with double jointed legs. I think they're the only bird of prey that's got that adaptation. And they've got this amazing balancing. They weigh 500 grams. They're so lightweight and buoyant when they fly, and they can hang upside down on weaver birds' nests, and they can grab the food that's inside, and they can crevice feed, so extractive feeding again. So this is what we were looking for, extractive feeding and nest raiding. These are the components of the behaviour, so reaching inside with the legs, removing substrate. These are edited, we come up with loads of different things here when we're doing the workflows. It's really interesting for us and keepers to do a bit of research into natural history. It's where it all starts. You need to know a lot about the ethology of these animals in order to create a behaviour portfolio that meets all of their behavioural needs. These are the outcomes, or a couple of the outcomes that we wanted to see. BCS is body condition. We wanted to see an increase in body condition, potentially. It's hard to study with a harrier hawk, but you never know. We might be able to weigh them using this process. And so these are some of the environmental cues. So I was thinking about this morning. How can we proceed putting food into a nest of a bird? Well, the bird has to be there, and why would the bird be there? Maybe live food would be around, so we could potentially put live food in and substrates and stuff. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about the actual thing we did first. So we want multiple of these things, okay? Multiple hanging baskets. For the trial, for the sake of the trial, we did a bit of research, and I'm really pleased to say that the person who took this video, was in this video, is in the audience. Kat, I watched you on YouTube yesterday, and what we did, we got a lot of inspiration from our colleagues in the Hawk Conservancy, which is a fantastic centre down in Andover, in Hampshire. Probably the best falconry centre in the country, and they're a conservation organisation too. And they've done some amazing enrichment programs, and one of which is with their African harrier hawks. And so we were inspired by that after doing our workflow. And also Andy Hallsworth at Banham Zoo did this as well. So this is what it looks like, okay? So just starting off, this is the way that harrier hawks are fed on a daily basis up until we started doing this project. We call it scatter feeding, but essentially food is just placed around the trees. And so what they do is they use their eyesight, they fly down, they grab the food, and then they fly back up again. It's a really basic behaviour repertoire. Really, really simple. They've not really challenged in any way, and they don't really do very much activity throughout the day. And in fact, we're starting to see how inactive they were actually, because we weren't challenging them. So the first version of this, we decided, because we didn't know how they were going to react to new stimuli in the environment. They've been in there years without anything novel. So we decided just to do half-weaved baskets instead of the whole thing that you saw from the Hall Conservancy there, just so that they could be trained, if you like. They could learn by accessing these free operants in the environment, okay, these free reinforcers that are available there. So we taught them to collect food from those half baskets, then we weaved the top half and then cut some holes in, so they've got to then use some kind of method to get that food out. Again, we'd never seen this behaviour before with these birds, so clearly, but we know it happens because we've researched them in the wild and we've seen it in other zoos. So it must be something within their genetic makeup that they're capable of doing. And all they needed to do was to get one chance of showing us they could do it. They need to express that natural behaviour, get reinforced for it by collecting the food out of the nest, and then we can start adding some complexity and making it more difficult for them to get that resource. And the first time I saw it really well, Mose was down there in the morning, a lovely sunny day, and I got this video through and I just was so excited. Get ridiculously excited about seeing very, very simple things that animals do in the zoo. It's super cool, a great opportunity to see these natural behaviours and species-typical behaviours, and that's it. When you start to see them doing that, you realise how, and you can see the wings, so the components are balancing using the tail, balancing using the wings. They've had to use their understanding and cognitive ability to figure out that there's food in there. They've had to extract some of the substrates that's put inside as well, because we filled it with leaves in order to get access to that food. There, reinforcement. You know that if an animal is reinforced for a behaviour, in other words, if it gets a pleasant stimulus after doing a behaviour, it's going to keep going back and doing it. So now we can really add complexity. We can secure them underneath. So now they've got to do some more balancing. And this is when you're starting to see much more like if you Google Harrier hawk nest raiding in the wild, now you're starting to see some more of those behaviours right here. But we'd fix them because we didn't want them to move. We wanted it to be another iteration, so another approximation of behaviour towards that valued outcome that we were looking for. And here you can see the final one. So this was this morning. We've got this message from Charlotte, who's our EAC lead on the in London Zoo. And she's like, I've hung them last night. I don't know if they're going to use them, but we're going to put the food in anyway. And Mose went down first thing this morning and was ready with your camera, weren't you, and captured this amazing video. So it couldn't be more up to date, really. This is quite cool. Don't usually manage to process all these things and get them out there and disseminate to an audience in such a quick amount of time. But as you can see, you know, think back to the way that that animal was behaving in that first part of this video. Really basic behaviours, nothing cognitive going on whatsoever. Just looking and moving, collecting and consuming. It all happened in 25 seconds. This is now going to be part of a whole new program, which means that we can have multiple of these hanging baskets around, but only for maybe one day every 2 weeks, because we want to have another 10 different ways that the animals can use this important behaviour. It must be a behavioural need of the animal. It has to be, because it's so important part of their wild makeup. And just as Amanda was talking about with the contra-free loading, I bet you that there'll be a time when we put a chick next to one of these nests and they ignore it so they can go to this. And that's that concept. It's a wonderful natural phenomenon, biologically relevant and evolutionary important for animals to work for their food, as Amanda was brilliantly telling us about earlier. So this is what we want to do. Add infrastructure, more branch work, more places for hanging devices. We don't want the keeper to think it's 2 o'clock, I'm going to go and enrich my Harrier hawk. We want this to be a part of a feeding program, and then we want to use this project to inform the way that we manage all of our animals across the 2 zoos going forward. And it's something that every single zookeeper I've spoken to is just so excited about. And the more we can share it, the better. So what's next for us? Well, first of all, what we want to do is we want to create comprehensive behaviour portfolios for every single species at ZSL. This is a huge challenge. I'm keen on getting AI to do it for me, because I've got a feeling that if I can teach like a robot to do one of these workflows and then feed it information, you never know what might pop out the other end. I'm clearly not understanding this process very well, am I? But, you know, I'm sure there's a way that we can work with technology in order to make this a bit easier for us to get these inputs ready to go. And then we need to make sure that we write implementation plans. So instead of it being like we made the mistake potentially with the Hoofed team of saying, this is an amazing thing, now you've got to do it every day. No, that's not how it's going to work. It's got to be user-friendly. The team have to write their own plan and decide how often and when it's going to be used. Make it simple to input. We need to make them easy to achieve by integrating them into the daily care, and add complexity and duration to the behaviours through the addition of those environmental cues and enriched experiences. As Amanda said before, we need to evaluate. It's so crucial. And then we need to tell everyone about it and get all the zoos in our communities using this brilliant thing that we are so grateful that we had shared to us by the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. And this is a blue tree monitor the other day. We were trying to add a balancing behaviour to their feeding, which you can see we were able to achieve with that input, and we've made about 10 of those, so they can have a different one every time they get fed. So I'd just like to say thank you so much to all the zookeepers that appear in this, but also, even if they didn't, because every single person that we work with, Amanda and I, we're so lucky to work with all these amazing and passionate zookeepers that are just continually working towards striving every single day to enhance the lives of the animals in their care, and so open to all the mad and crazy ideas that we come up with all the time and try and get them over the line. Huge thanks to everyone that's up there. So Jess and Corbin from last year, Mose, fantastic work getting all this footage captured. We appreciate it so much and all your hard work. Mark and Chris at Team Building with Bite, who give us loads of devices like you can see here with this aardvark. James and Kat at the Hawke Conservancy. I know you're not there anymore, Portland's Park. And really a massive thanks to Jessica and Louisa at San Diego for the inspiration. And I went back to have a meeting with them about 6 months after we launched this process, okay? And I was really struggling because we hadn't really got anywhere with the different ways that we were trying to implement it. And they just said, don't worry about it. The most important thing is this: strive towards progress, not perfection. And I absolutely love that. It's my new motto. So, yes, thank you very much indeed for listening. Really appreciate you coming along and sharing our stories with us. Okay, can we sit down? We've got 10 minutes if you'd like to ask any questions of any of our speakers about anything that you've seen today, or even anything you like, really, about the zoo. The question was, how do you elicit the fear response with an animal that is preyed upon in the wild? How do you, and I suppose what you're asking is, how do you create that element of stress that it would naturally be experiencing in the wild? Is that kind of what you're getting at? That's a great question, and it's so ethically challenging for any of us here to answer, because obviously there's a load of debate over the years, and anyone who's been working in zoos and talking about enrichment, you know, stress is important. It is an important part of an animal's life. But our overall feeling, and I'm going to hand this over to my colleagues as well, is that animals find enough stress in their lives without us telling them that they're going to be eaten. And I know that sounds a bit simplistic, but even if you live in the wild, you live in the zoo, there's no such thing as perfect welfare. And so they're going to be challenges, and those stresses might be different to the ones that the animals experience in the wild. Zebra being chased by a lion is very difficult to replicate, but it will experience some of those high arousal states. And just as we say that you don't need to be exactly mimicking the amount of time that an elephant eats in the wild, as long as you can get the same valued outcomes of the behavioural challenges that you give to the animal, whether it's an enriched feeder or whatever, the same applies to stress. That's how I would answer it from a behaviour science point of view. Amanda?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, and people will have different views on it. We don't really know enough, really, about stress and the different, I mean, it's a chemical reaction in the body, so, you know, different things will produce those chemicals in the body. So as Jim said, there's probably other stresses that the animals get in the zoo. They don't have the stress of maybe going hungry or being hunted, but there's probably other stresses with people proximity or different animals. So without knowing too much about it, I think it's quite dangerous to say, right, we're going to have we're going to elicit this response. Where it may be useful sometimes is, and I think we haven't done it here, but animals that like tamarins, marmosets that have been reintroduced back into the wild, they need to learn that they don't go and investigate a snake. So that's something we haven't done here, and I don't know, but that is a case where it would be worthwhile because the outcome, you really need the outcome, otherwise it's not going to be successful in the wild.
So I realise now I've asked the question that I'm not trying to give them a hard time.
No, it's fine.
No, because we do think about that, because
yeah.
it is in, Jim talking about getting that behavioural repertoire out, there'll be different...
They're used to hiding.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we're working with our conservation team at the moment. They're re-releasing cheetahs into a place where there's crocodiles, and they're going from South Africa to, and I can't remember which country, but they've never experienced crocodiles before, and there's watering holes in the environment that they're going to be re-released in. So we're talking about how we can stimulate that fear response to a crocodile in the water, and they come up with some great ideas.
Yeah.
Like this fake crocodile, like as if you're in the Universal Studios or something, and it comes, I'm like, but it's the thing with behaviour is it's got to be connected so directly to the stimulus. So if you want to decrease this behaviour, it has to be really, really aversive and connected directly to the stimulus. Otherwise, they could habituate, so they can become used to something in the environment. So it's a really difficult subject, but fascinating one. Thanks for that question. Really interesting. Anyone else? Maybe we'll use the mic if that's okay.
It's fine. I'm just kind of wondering if you ever purposefully engineer failure. So like with the zip lines, would they ever be empty or something like that to kind of stimulate a hunt, but there isn't a reward at the end kind of thing?
It's a really great question, isn't it? And in fact that I suppose the way that we would do that, and I think the hunt one is really interesting. I'll let Amanda answer that if you've got any comments. But just like I talked about with the two projects at the end there, there won't be 100% success rate. We want to make sure that we're prolonging the feeding durations. But if you think about it in the wild, they're not going to find food every time the otter puts its, that's the point, isn't it? It's continually foraging and using that behaviour. So maybe if we had 50 tubes, only 5 of them would have food reinforcers inside. So that kind of is, that's the same really in what you're saying. Same with the harrier hawk. We'd have 10 of those, 2 of which will have food in, for example. What about with the, I think we've ever done it with the cats.
We haven't done it with the cats, and it's something that we're thinking about doing really. Because I think it would elicit some different behaviours, particularly if we queue it up in behaviour chains over a period of days, and then the animal's maybe just got a certain window. So it will fail if it doesn't act quickly. We can obviously repeat it the next day. We're not going to starve the animal for days and days and days. But giving an animal an opportunity to fail will, really hone its instincts for kind of hunting. So it is something that we're thinking of doing. I mean, with our cats at the moment, they're managed differently at both sites, and we're looking at, giving much bigger feeds and much longer fast days in between, which would approximate more what the wild is like. And then within that, once we can kind of set that up a bit, I think that then that will be a nice time to introduce this kind of opportunity to fail as well. It's definitely something that we're thinking of.
What about hoofstock, Gemma? It's a bit more complicated there, isn't it? Because they don't fail much in the wild, do they?
Yeah, so we do put, say if we're putting multiple items in, we do throw sometimes a few empty things in as well. So that does mean that they have to look and find things. But when it's browse, for example, it's there and they will usually strip it. We do find a few failures, like Jim talked you through the enrichment evaluation form. We have probably, out of all of the ones we filled out, about 3/4 are successful, and there's about 1/4 where we put that it didn't work, they didn't like it, they ignored it, they didn't find the food, we've taken it out, but we still do have to provide all of that diet as well. So it's a tricky one with the herbivores.
Yeah, it's a much more complicated subject.
Yeah.
I think it's probably more of a hunting question, but it's a great question. Thank you. Really appreciate it. We've got time for another.
Sort of similar to what we've spoken about just now, but how do you troubleshoot and work on things that haven't worked? Have you got any examples of that? Like how you explore failure, but not on purpose, where you've thought something's an amazing idea and it just wasn't?
Oh, I've had that my entire career. Oh, man. You know, I think the best example of that is a sloth bear we had called Columbo, right? And so they're really challenging to enrich bears, really challenging because they're so intelligent, physically powerful. And this was prior to the workflow process. So we hadn't had that kind of new kind of reinvigoration of what we were how we were thinking about behaviour. I spent 45 minutes creating a log pile for this sloth bear with a boomer ball at the bottom, thinking it's going to take him ages to get to that. And he literally went in, threw the logs that way, picked it up, threw it down and walked away. It took 10 seconds. And if you look at, like, you know, we talk about keeper time, if you like thinking about the amount of time you're spending, this is like why this process is so important, because it actually then identifies things where you're not having this huge waste of keeper time because we've tested it all out and it's part of a normal daily routine. You're not adding too much to the environment. Is that what you were getting at? Or more like, yeah, and troubleshooting that is, to me, is going back to basics. What behaviour was I looking for there? I was thinking about me probably in a bear costume, you know what I mean? Like moving these logs around and getting the thing, because I clearly wasn't thinking about the natural behaviour of a sloth bear, was I? So, you know, I think that's it's been a really big eye-opener for all of us, I think, working with animals within the enrichment side of things. So any kind of additions to that?
Yeah, we would just talk about it, try and work things out. You saw Molly, the giraffe, with that tube feeder where she was slinging things around. The reason we put that in is we were seeing head bobbing where she was eating, and we weren't really sure what it meant. We were worried, was it a stress behaviour? Was it something to do with her teeth? Was she in pain? We just tried lots and lots of different things. We tried different types of ball feeders, bottle feeders, and when we put that tube in, it just stopped. And so for us at the time, because we didn't have the evaluation forms, we weren't thinking necessarily in terms of the workflow and breaking things down. We were just trying to find quick fixes and throw all of our brain power and all the ideas at it. But eventually we did find the solution, and that tube feeder really does work. And we haven't seen, when she feeds from that, we don't see that weird head bobbing that we weren't too sure what it was. But there wasn't a lot of method to it at the time, and that's why this process is really exciting, because hopefully it will streamline that. It will effectively save us time, which is also really important, but maybe it means we'll think of things in a complete different way and come up with even more ideas. So yeah, it's exciting.
Yes, so thank you very, very much. Can I have a huge round of applause for Gemma and Amanda? And thank you very, very much indeed for coming along and sharing this wonderful space with us. We really hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about the way that we're trying to progress our animal care. Everything we do at ZSL is about animal well-being and conservation. So we're really keen on sharing all that in these free events going forward. So please look out for us. So we'll be doing another one hopefully in the bicentennial year, which is next year, 200 years of ZSL. Thank you very much. Safe journey home. Thank you.